they didn't disappear overnight. They were pushed out, slowly, violently, repeatedly. For over 1,000 years, Jewish communities were the backbone of European urban life. They built towns, they managed trade networks, they translated ancient knowledge that sparked the Renaissance. And then, they were expelled. Not once, not twice, but in a relentless cycle of expulsion that spanned a continent. Today, we aren't just looking at the dates, we're uncovering the why. Why did kings who relied on Jewish scholars one day order them to leave under pain of death? Why did neighbors who traded together for decades suddenly turn to fire and steel? As we will see, the excuses used, blasphemy, crime, or ritual, tell us very little about the victims, but they tell us everything about the empires that failed them. Jewish expulsions were never random. They followed a cold mathematical pattern. They almost always occurred at the intersection of four crises: economic collapse, the birth of a new state, religious radicalization, or popular unrest. Jews did not need to commit crimes to be targeted. They only needed to be useful yesterday and inconvenient today. In medieval Europe, Jews occupied a unique legal space. They were often serfs of the chamber, meaning they belonged directly to the crown. They were a protected class, but that protection was a cage. They were used as the king's private sponge, allowed to accumulate wealth through money lending, meant only for the king to squeeze that wealth back through arbitrary taxes. When the sponge was dry, it was thrown away. Let's begin in 1290. King Edward I of England did something no major European monarch had done before. He expelled every single Jew from his kingdom. Roughly 3,000 people were forced onto ships with nothing but what they could carry. The official excuse? Usury. The church forbade Christians from charging interest, leaving Jewish lenders as the only source of credit. This made them essential to the economy, but it made them a target for the nobility. By 1290, Edward I was broke from his wars in Wales and Scotland. He had already taxed the Jewish community into poverty. He didn't need their future taxes, he needed their current records. By expelling the Jews, Edward did two things. He seized all their remaining property, and more importantly, he canceled the debts of his powerful barons. It was a massive transfer of wealth. England traded an entire people for a balanced ledger. It would be nearly 400 years before Jews were allowed to return. Across the English Channel, France turned expulsion into a recurring policy. In 1306, 1322, and 1394, the French crown expelled the Jews, only to invite them back a few years later. Why the flip-flop? It was a financial reset button. In 1306, King Philip the Fair was facing a currency crisis. His solution was to arrest every Jew in France on a single day, seize their property, and take over the collection of their loans for himself. He literally took their accounts receivable. Once the crown had milked the debts dry, the Jews were allowed back for a massive entry fee. It was a cycle of monetization. The Jews weren't being punished for their faith, they were being harvested for their capital. In the mid-1300s, the world ended. The Black Death wiped out 1/3 of Europe. Panic creates a vacuum, and that vacuum is always filled by hate. Because Jewish ritual washing and dietary laws sometimes led to slightly lower infection rates, the rumor began Jews were poisoning the wells to destroy Christendom. The results were horrific. In Strasbourg, 2,000 Jews were burned alive. In Mainz and Cologne, entire communities were erased. Over 500 Jewish communities were destroyed or displaced during the plague years. But look closer at the records. In almost every city where a massacre occurred, the first thing the mob did after the killing was head to the town hall to burn the records of their debts. Fear gave the mob a torch, but greed gave them a destination. In 1492, the same year Christopher Columbus reached the Americas, the most settled Jewish community in the world was destroyed. The Alhambra Decree gave Spain's Jews a choice: convert to Catholicism or leave within 4 months. Spain had just finished the Reconquista, the centuries-long war to retake the peninsula from Islamic rule. The monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, wanted a modern centralized state. To them, a state required one faith, one law, one blood. The Jewish community, with its own courts and legal autonomy, was a state within a state that the new monarchy could not tolerate. An estimated 200,000 Jews fled, leaving behind homes, gold, and 700 years of history. They fled to North Africa, the Ottoman Empire, and the Netherlands, taking their skills and trade networks with them. Spain gained religious purity, but they lost the very people who could have managed the massive wealth coming in from the New World. Portugal followed Spain in 1496, but they added a cruel twist. King Manuel I didn't actually want the Jews to leave. He wanted their labor and their mines. He ordered the expulsion, but then closed the ports. He trapped them. Tens of thousands were forcibly baptized in the streets. They became new Christians, hunted for centuries by the Inquisition for secretly practicing their faith. In Italy, the strategy was different. Instead of expulsion, they invented the ghetto. In Venice in 1516, the Jewish population was confined to a small, walled-off foundry district. The ghetto was a compromise of greed. The Italian city-states wanted Jewish trade and medical knowledge, but they wanted to keep the presence of the community contained. It was a way to exploit a minority without having to look them in the eye. Why did this keep happening? Because the Jewish people were the ever-ready scapegoat. They were legally distinct, which meant they could be targeted without affecting the rights of the real citizens. They were economically specialized, which meant they always had assets worth seizing. And they were religiously visible, which made it easy to sell the theft as a holy act. The excuses changed. In 1200 it was usury. In 1300 it was the plague. In 1400 it was national unity. But the incentive was always the same: debt cancellation, wealth transfer, and political consolidation. History shows us an uncomfortable truth. A society does not expel its minorities when things are going well. It does so when the system is failing, and the people in power need a distraction from their own bankruptcy. The history of Jewish expulsion isn't just a story of tragedy. It's a warning about how states behave when they are under pressure. If this breakdown helped you see the gears of history turning, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shaped our world. Tell me in the comments, do you see these patterns of scapegoating repeating in the modern world, or has the nature of state power truly changed?